Okay, we're now going to have Dr. Frances Bernard, who we all know her as Franny, and she specializes in Aztec economy, society, and culture. She received her PhD in anthropology for the University of Texas at Austin in 1975 and is currently Professor Emerita in anthropology at California State University, San Bernardino. She has done archival and museum research in Mexico, Europe, and the United States, and ethnographic research in Costa Veracruz and the Sierra Norte de Puebla, Mexico. She has authored or co-authored more than a dozen books and over 100 articles. Dr. Verdun has appeared in documentary programs on the History and Discovery Channel. She continues her research on ancient Mesoamerican mosaics and colonial period Nahuatl writing. Please welcome Dr. Frances Verdun.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would like to extend my thanks and congratulations to Manuel and all of his wonderful institutions for once again putting on a wonderful symposium. It's always a pleasure to come here. Thank you, Manuel. In the course of trying to figure out what to talk about for today's lecture, I got thinking about all of Patty's extraordinary contributions, and which led me automatically to an extraordinary topic. So that's what we get, extraordinary today. We're most often as anthropologists, anyway, I don't know how many of you are that, but if you are, you understand this. We look for patterns, we look for regularities, we look for things that happen over and over again. We look for something that we could call culture in a general sense. And in the course of doing that, we forget that there are always extraordinary things that happen. And I would ask any of you to think of any time in your life when you've not had an extraordinary thing happen to you. They happen all the time. But we usually dismiss them as anomalies, as something that's odd or different, and then we sort of forget about them. But I personally have come to think that if we look at those extraordinary things that happen, that they reveal a lot of the inner workings of a culture. If a culture is under stress, or a lot of different things happen to a culture that don't usually happen, that the culture responds in a way that we can learn a lot about it. So what I've done for today is to pick out a few of these extraordinary things and see what we can pull out from them, see what we can learn about them. So to do this, we're going to have to take a kind of a little time machine here, and we're going to send you to Tenochtitlan. This is where you live. You live in one of the greatest cities of the world, perhaps 200,000 people living there in the early part of the 16th century. And you are one of any number of people engaged in perhaps farming, weaving, fishing, marketing, cooking. These are everyday things over and over again. This is what you do. Raise children, you make stuff, all kinds of whatever stuff there is to make, and there's a lot of it. You can be judged if you go wrong, being judged. Partying, of course, is always a part of the picture. You play, sometimes you gamble yourself away. First you gamble your spouse and your kids away first. There's always, if there is an order to this, there's a priority. But these are things that are going on all the time, right? Nothing unusual, nothing strange. In fact, wars are going on all the time, so you always have to be prepared for that. The one thing is that they, except for one little instance we'll look at in just a little bit, the wars do not touch your doorstep. They're elsewhere, but you may be sent off, right? Or if you're a woman, your husband may be sent off, and you have to prepare for certain inevitabilities that may happen in that case as they come back. And there are these theatrical ceremonies that you or I might consider to be extraordinary, in fact, extremely extraordinary if you have human sacrifices, but which happen with such scripted and predictable regularity that they're really nothing outstanding, nothing new. It just happened. Oh, it's the month of Ochwanisli. We do this. So if you're living there at the time, this is your life, right? This is your everyday life. But some things did happen that interrupted these regularities, that interrupted this everyday way of life. Nature was very alive. There were earthquakes, there were volcanic eruptions, there were pestilences, there were floods, famine, and actually those things happen fairly often. But the thing is they're unpredictable, and you certainly don't want them to come like you would love to have the month of Ochwanisli come along. So nature did put a little kink in your life. Sometimes certain ceremonies occurred, such as what we just heard about, the 52-year world renewal ceremonies. You may live through one of those if you're lucky. But again, that's pretty unusual. And then, of course, those pesky Spaniards kind of ruined the whole thing at the end, didn't they? But we'll come back to that. So this is sort of your ordinary life if you're living it. Pretend you're there. There were things that did happen that were quite different. And I've picked out 3 of these to just briefly give you an idea of what it might be like to have something different in your life happen if you're a resident of Tenochtitlan. And I've sort of graded these. They're not all equally extraordinary, in my mind at least. So the first one I start with is sort of borderline extraordinary. It's not extraordinary for everybody, but it is for at least a few of the participants. And this particular event is when a merchant offers a slave for sacrifice. Now, we know about these merchants, right? Those haughty, entrepreneurial merchants that took advantage of you at every pass, right? So it's no secret that they did risk their lives, courageously going into distant lands. Some of them, as you can see, a little more courageous than others, a little more involved than others. They also went about town very humbly. We're told that they wore very simple and low-value clothing. And as we can see here we have. But nonetheless, they still can't resist ordering people around. They sort of taught that. And they became extremely wealthy. They couldn't own land and they didn't own labor, but they did own portable wealth. They did become very wealthy in particularly luxury goods. They had monopolies in many ways of some of these goods where they transported them from distant tropical regions, brought them back into the basin of Mexico and sold them in the marketplaces. So they're loading up all this wealth, and they're secreting it. They're coming across the lake after their great journeys in the dark of night and hiding it in a relative's place and not letting anybody know really how much there is. But they are accumulating a lot. Well, what do you do with it, right? You've got all this wealth. So here we are. Here's Conquetalisli, but this is not the fancy Conquetalisli. This is the one that happens every year. A merchant, if he accumulates enough wealth, could offer an enormous, expensive feast. And that feast involved what we mentioned here: turkeys, dogs, maize, salt, cacao beans, good old cacao beans, Manuel's, copal incense, tobacco. Let me give you an idea of what this was. 800 to 1,200 precious cloaks, not simple ones, but precious ones. 400 decorated loincloths. 80 to 100 turkeys. 20 to 40 dogs. Bins of maize, beans, and chia. Tomatoes, chilies, squash seeds. 40 to 60 jars of salt. 3 to 4 boats of water. They collect water in the boats, in the boatloads. Each of these boatloads is to be worth 100 cacao beans. So you're still accumulating stuff. 20 sacks of cacao beans. Firewood, charcoal, baskets, cups. I'm just going to hallucinogenic mushrooms. Those are really expensive this time of year, too. So we do try to look into everything here. And all of these things, a tremendous accumulation of wealth to be able to do this. So you didn't just do this in 1 year. It must have taken you several years to accumulate this kind of wealth to be able to then dispose of it. Right? You're basically giving it away through feasting and gifts. And even more than that, you had to buy a slave. And you bought a slave depending on how much wealth you have and how much you're willing to pay. You want one skilled in dancing, and they actually cost more the better they could dance. And actually, if I were the slave, I wouldn't dance very well. Maybe I wouldn't be sold. Because what's going to happen to you is you're going to be bathed, and that's nice. It's about time, and good thing. But then you're going to be sacrificed. So I suppose everybody has their strategies. In the course of all of this event, the oops, I'm sorry. Whoa. Where are we? Oh, I really lost it, huh? There we go. By preliminaries, yeah, I pushed the wrong button. The person giving the feast and offering the slave is this guy here. He doesn't look very haughty right now, but he has to go through a whole lot of admonitions by his elders, telling him exactly how important all of this is. And there's feasting, giving away things, hallucinogenic mushrooms. And then the slave is offered for sacrifice, and the merchant does go publicly out into the city, away from his own guild sort of arrangement, and offers that sacrifice, although the priest performs it. So this is the thing. This is the event. So what do we know from this? Well, some things we know, we sort of basically understand anyway. The amount of wealth, extraordinary wealth, undoubtedly accumulated over years. The gain, although you're part of a group, the gain was individual. An individual was the person who, it was the individual, not the group, although you could not embarrass your group. Both men and women could, in fact, gain this kind of status, which is a little unusual in our overall Aztec setting. The guild had to approve you, but even though the guild approved you, it required public validation. In other words, you gained status within your guild by offering something to the larger society. And that's something we don't usually think about, how that connection happens. We usually think of these groups as being very exclusive and just climbing their own little hierarchies. But they couldn't do it without the broader society. There's one, that's sort of borderline. It's extraordinary for the merchant, but, if you're the guy on the street, ho hum, another sacrifice. Right? But let's go into something maybe a little more extraordinary, right? Pretty extraordinary, let's say. And there is a story about Moctezuma Xochiyotzin, the second Moctezuma, has a little problem, and it's with a very stubborn rock. We need to take this into account. This is an illustration from Duran. And keep in mind that the wheels, while they would have been helpful, really weren't part of the scene. It would have changed the whole story, I think. Here. And you like the freeloader, right? You're just adding the weight to it. Not nice. So what happens here? Moctezuma wants to glorify his city. He wants to advertise the magnificence of his city. And the way that you do that is you build great constructions, great monuments. And he wants a new rock. He wants a carved rock. And it's going to be greater than any carved rock ever to be seen. Right? And so he sends people out, and they find the rock big enough, a base rock big enough, and they find it in Chalco. In Chimalpain's country. And so they have to, if you take a look at the map, you realize they have to transport this rock somehow between Chalco and Tenochtitlan, which is in the middle of the lake. So this is his dilemma. So he amasses great numbers of people. First of all, he orders people from the Chinampa zone, Xochimilco, Mixquic, this area here, to go to Chalco and start yanking that rock, to get that rock going. So they do. They get it going a little bit. Now the rock stops. Not going anywhere. They can't do it. So Montezuma begs the ruler of Texcoco. Says, help me out here. And so the ruler sends a lot more men. The rock comes a little farther. The rock stops, and at that point the rock says, the rock starts talking. Says, hey dude, I ain't going anywhere. In fact, I will go maybe a little way. I'll go as far as I want to go, but no farther. And you're not going to make me. You're not going to win this. And Montezuma says, I am the Lord of the land. You're a rock, for heaven's sake, right? I'm going to win this. So Montezuma, the rock doesn't move, of course, and so Montezuma gets more people. He summons the people from the Otomi country. And they come down, they add to the force pulling that rock. The rock goes a little farther and says, you know, you're still not going to win this battle. I'm still only going to go as far as I want to. Montezuma doesn't believe him. So he goes to Azcapotzalco and requested people from there to help him out. So he has all of these various people pulling this rock. Well, ultimately the rock is pulled up to the lake. They build a bridge. The rock gets on the bridge, and that stubborn, that kind of little mean kind of rock decides then that it's going to just crash through the bridge into the lake and disappear. Divers are sent down. They can't find the rock, and later on the rock is found back in Chalco. Who won, right? So it's a wonderful story. I think this is a fabulous story, right? But what do we know? What does it tell us, right? It tells us actually quite a few things. For one thing, the ruler is willing to make an enormous investment for this, for a monument, right? That is an extremely important thing to have that symbol for him. And it's not only the guys pulling, the laborers pulling the rock, but there are priests and jesters and musicians, all kinds of folks helping this along. It's recorded that 10 to 12,000 laborers were employed in this. Now, this is from a Spanish account, a Spanish time account. We know that they're notorious for exaggerating, but say you cut the numbers in half, you've still got 5,000 to 6,000 people. Still a lot of people. Two of the most interesting things to me is that Montezuma variously, he ordered, he begged, he summoned, or he requested these people. And it's a real window into how he related to the different people. He didn't order the king of Texcoco, but he did order the people from the Chinampa zone whom he controlled better. So you have a good idea of what his relations were to these other groups. And on the more nuanced side of things, fate enters in. The rock represents fate, right? You're not gonna do this if I don't want it to, right? And it really presages all of these omens and whatnot that occur later on. He was doomed to fail. The rock told him he was going to fail. He tried to resist it, but it was to no avail. So we actually can learn quite a bit about this funky little story about the rock. And there's one that's, my third one is one that I call definitely extraordinary, and Duran records it, and he calls it a strange situation. It was even odd to him. And this is a case where refugees from Huixotzinco to the east of the basin of Mexico are welcomed into Tenochtitlan. Now, on the surface, it doesn't sound like much. Okay, sure, fine, right? But consider this. Huixotzinco and the Mexica, the Aztecs, had been traditional enemies, in fact, very serious enemies. And right before this particular event that we're talking about in the early 16th century, there had been a very desperate battle between the Mexica and the Huixotzincos. Two of Montezuma's brothers were killed in that battle, so you can imagine that the emotions ran fairly high between these groups. And so this was the setting. Now, there was warfare going on all the time, but these particular groups really went at it. Well, at this moment, when the Cinco's start getting in trouble, and they come to Montezuma for help because they say that the Tlaxcalans, who are their neighbors, they're right up in that same area, have been bad neighbors, very bad, very bad. In fact, they've been ravaging their fields, destroying their crops for 2 years, is what the Cinco's claim. So they have bad neighbors and they want help. So even after having killed 2 of Montezuma's brothers, they dare to come to Montezuma and ask for help. Be my friend, right? Help us. We're refugees. Take us in. And Montezuma does. He takes them in. In fact, whoops, let me go back here. He takes them in to the extent that he welcomes all the Cinco's, and the report says that most of them came. And they stayed in the nobles stayed in the nobles' houses, commoners housed all manner of Cinco commoners, and at their own expense. And Montezuma says, be generous, you know, and then the Cinco's didn't have to pay anything, as it were. So basically Montezuma is being a little overly generous, and he says, okay, while you're here in Cinco, we'll take care of things. We'll go over to Tlaxcala. It was an excuse for him, of course. We'll go over to Tlaxcala, we'll beat him up and get things better for you. Okay, fine. Yeah. And he did. And they captured a great general in the course of that, and things sort of ironed out a little bit. And the Cinco's then were allowed to leave, although not all of them did. A couple of years later, after things had settled back, the Cinco's come in and raid a temple at the edge of Tenochtitlan. Now, business as usual again, right? So from friend to foe, after having been from foe to friend. Right? This, by the way, was this volatile kinds of these volatile kinds of military relations were extremely common. They went on all the time, but this was a little extreme since the degree of hospitality that the Mexica had given the Cinco's. This, by the way, was the only time prior to the Spaniards that any enemy even approached the city of Tenochtitlan in any military way. It was quite a shock to the Mexica. So what about this event? What does it tell us? This ends up being kind of interesting to me. These volatile relations that we know about. Just in a moment, in a flash, it doesn't take anything to become friends to enemies, enemies to friends. You really have to have short memories, right? Montezuma forgot about his brothers awful fast and all of that, right? So we know these go up and down and up and down, and this was, of course, something that Cortez took advantage of ultimately. Montezuma, he was willing to kind of divide and conquer, right? Something that Cortez did later on. So it wasn't just Cortez's idea, right? Montezuma was happy to separate the Cinco's and the Tlaxcalas because they had often been allied against him. Many Cinco people, according to the story, actually stayed in Tenochtitlan after they were allowed to go back home. Sort of like, kind of like the bright city lights after all that. So you kind of wonder about this. We talk about cities being diverse and mobility of people, but this is an interesting kind of twist on the kind of way that people might move into other people's cities. And it's more of a question than an answer, right? And how diverse were these cities and how did they become diverse? This is one possible way through these kinds of peculiar situations. And it gives us sort of a window into mobility. We think of mobility, people moving for economic reasons or reasons such as that, but here's another reason that approached right before us. And then, massively extraordinary, here come the Spaniards. But that's another story. So thank you.
Now this one I feel fully capable of speaking to. Where did I first meet her? She finished everything but her dissertation in Texas. And then her husband got a job in Southern California, so he was working full-time, and she was writing her dissertation. So she decided she would stop by UCLA, and she would take one of Nicholson's seminars. And that's where I met Franny, yes. And got to know her. In fact, I'd been out of school for all those years. I know her 11, 12 years. And I think Franny taught me Mesoamerican archaeology for those 12 years. Do you remember that? Yeah. Anyway, and then she told me that she had decided to do a wonderful thing. She decided she would bring out a new edition of Codex Mendoza. And I said, I think that's fabulous, and I hope you'll let me write something about clothing. Fine, she said. And then a week or two later, she came back and said, would you like to help me with the Codex Mendoza? And I said, yes. If you'll come in the back country of Mexico with me in the field to figure out what the Spanish, if the Spanish are still wearing some of them, what they were wearing when I studied them in the codices. And she agreed. I had 5 field seasons in the back country of Mexico, all of them funded by National Geographic. I think Franny was with me on the first 3. I said to her today, do you remember the time we got stuck in the Rio Pantepec? She said yes. And she was really the hero of it. It was a big river. I mean, it wasn't to be taken lightly. It was as big as where I am back to the back wall. Anyway, bigger. But much bigger. Anyway, I got midway through and got stuck. There was a hole there, and I got stuck in that hole. And I was sitting there thinking, what do I do now? And Franny was the heroine of the thing. She said, first you go forward, then you go backward. Then you go forward, then you go backward. Then you go forward, and sure enough, out we came. And we went, and did you think of the name of that town? We went to a town, yet another town with yet another Nahuatl name, and we worked all day. At the end of the day, we were tired. We got in the car. There were 4 of us. Franny was there, interviewed by Honor Johnson, the authority on Indian costume, and Edward Mader, who at that time was the curator of costumes and textiles at LACMA. And of course, I was there, and I was driving. And at the end of the day, I drove from that village, and I came to the edge of that river. And I stopped, and I looked at it, and then I remembered that National Geographic uses very 19th century language. And I was the head of the expedition. And I remember thinking, yeah, and the head of the expedition gets to drive across the Rio Pantepec. But we did, and we came through. So I've known Franny for a long time, and she has been a very organized scholar. And I've learned a lot from her. And that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would like to extend my thanks and congratulations to Manuel and all of his wonderful institutions for once again putting on a wonderful symposium. It's always a pleasure to come here. Thank you, Manuel. In the course of trying to figure out what to talk about for today's lecture, I got thinking about all of Patty's extraordinary contributions, and which led me automatically to an extraordinary topic. So that's what we get, extraordinary today. We're most often, as anthropologists anyway, I don't know how many of you are that, but if you are, you understand this. We look for patterns, we look for regularities, we look for things that happen over and over again. We look for something that we could call culture in a general sense. But And in the course of doing that, we forget that there are always extraordinary things that happen. And
museum research in Mexico, Europe, and the United States, and ethnographic research in coastal Veracruz and the Sierra Norte de Puebla, Mexico. She has authored or co-authored more than a dozen books and over 100 articles. Dr. Verdán has appeared in documentary programs on the History and Discovery Channel. She continues her research on ancient Mesoamerican mosaics and colonial period Nahuatl writing. Please welcome Dr. Francis Verdán.
Would ask any of you to think of any time in your life when you've not had an extraordinary thing happen to you. They happen all the time. But we usually dismiss them as anomalies, as something that's odd or different, and then we sort of forget about them. But I personally have come to think that if we look at those extraordinary things that happen, that they reveal a lot of the inner workings of a culture. If a culture is under stress, or a lot of different things happen to a culture that don't usually happen, that the culture responds in a way.
Okay, we're not going to have Dr. Francis Verdán, who we all know her as Franny, and she specializes in Aztec economy, society, and culture. She received her PhD in anthropology from the University of Texas at Austin in 1975 and is currently Professor Emerita in anthropology at California State University, San Bernardino. She has done archival